Off the coast of northern British Columbia, right by the border to Alaska, sits the proposed site of one of Canada's new fast-tracked nation-building projects, the Ksi Lisims LNG plant. At press conferences, the Prime Minister has painted Ksi Lisims as almost too good to be true.
Ksi Lisims will become Canada's second largest LNG facility with a capacity to export 12 million tons of LNG every year to new markets. It'll also be one of the world's cleanest LNG operations, with emissions an incredible 94% below the global average, and with the potential to reach net zero by the end of this decade.
None of these things are lies, but they're not the full truth.
Western LNG is the owner of the Ksi Lisims terminal, and it would be built in Korea with Korean and Chinese steel.
LNG has the largest greenhouse gas footprint of any fossil fuel.
But if you actually look at the LNG market, it's kind of headed for a glut right now. It's not clear whether or not this is going to go through because the investors might look at it and go, well, we're just not going to get a good return on it.
So let's dive into Ksi Lisims, the complicated and controversial infrastructure that supports it, its financial viability, and what it means for the climate and Indigenous communities. Understanding Ksi Lisims, and particularly the claims Carney has made about it, means we first have to understand two other projects in BC. The first being the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Pipeline, or PRGT. The PRGT initially received an environmental assessment and some Indigenous approvals back in 2014. It was originally owned by TC Energy, a Calgary-based energy giant who also built the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which was disrupted by years of conflict with Wet'suwet'en people and environmental supporters. As with the Trans Mountain Pipeline, this led costs to balloon, more than doubling from $6.2 billion to $14.5 billion, and TC Energy sold part of its ownership to the American company KKR. Things went in a similar fashion with the PRGT, except this time, Indigenous groups and allies fought to stop the production of the Pacific Northwest LNG liquefaction and export facility, which is what the pipeline was supposed to supply. That project was canceled in 2017 when the company that owned it backed out, putting the pipeline in limbo. In 2024, TC Energy sold the pipeline to the Nisga'a government and Western LNG, which is an American company based in Texas. The pipeline began construction on August 26, 2024, with a new destination of the proposed Ksi Lisims LNG facility, around 100 kilometers north of its original destination, but with a new total length that was about 100 kilometers shorter. The environmental assessment completed by the province back in 2014 had an expiry date of November 2024, after which new assessments would need to be completed, which can take years. However, BC's environmental minister determined that the project had substantially started, meaning that either too much work had been done or too much money had been invested in the project to cancel it and require a new assessment. By granting the pipeline that status, its 10-year-old environmental assessment approval would be valid indefinitely, despite the fact that the route of the pipeline was significantly different than what was included in the original environmental assessment. Beyond that, the pipeline only had a few months of work put into it, in which time the completed work consisted primarily of clearing forests from a small section of land. The PRGT, which will cross over 1,000 waterways, including important sources of salmon and other fish, has been opposed by many First Nations.
A year ago, the Gitnao hereditary chiefs, who just was one of the other nations that's in the way of the PRGT pipeline, after seeing how the Coastal GasLink pipeline debacle hurt the Wet'suwet'en, they were not really super happy to have another gas transmission line. So last year they burned their benefits agreements in a public display, and they set up blockades and that sort of thing.
The whole issue of pipelines in northern British Columbia is highly contentious. As soon as they were talking about the pipeline going forward, all I could think was, oh, here we go again. It's going to be the same situation, same problems, same conflicts. It's one of those situations where people don't forget. And so, that informs the next project, the next development.
Nations like the Gitnao and Gitsen have both said that they will continue to protest and block the pipeline at any point that it crosses their lands. So when they talk about Ksi Lisims being Indigenous-led, it's not a lie. The Nisga'a own part of the pipeline that will feed it, and it's being built on their lands, where they are, quote, partners on the project. Although what exactly that means economically is difficult to parse.
It's in a certain sense a marketing tool. It's a way of, kind of giving the illusion of having consent for a project. The real question I have is, okay, if it's Indigenous led, does that mean everyone who is Indigenous, who's affected by it or could be involved in it, is actually in support of it?
Both the PRGT and SLISMs are the subject of 3 lawsuits from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups. The second important project has to do with Carney's claims that SLISMs will emit 94% less than the global average for LNG facilities. That all depends on the North Coast transmission line. The NCTL will transport clean power from hydroelectric dams from Prince George to Terrace and north to Bob Quinn Lake. Announced in 2023, the project's budget has already doubled from $3 billion to $6 billion, before being added to the latest batch of major projects. The NCTL is primarily being built to provide power to natural gas operations, LNG export facilities, mining, and the Prince Rupert port expansion. Projects like SLISMs. Even if everything goes smoothly, the line is not expected to be complete until sometime between 2032 and 2034. That's at least 3 years in which SLISMs will generate power not from renewable energy, but from burning natural gas. If completed, it will be the second largest LNG facility in the country, requiring 600 megawatts, making it one of the most energy-intensive projects in the province. So when Carney talks about SLISMs being green and one of the cleanest LNG facilities in the world, he's talking about years from now, and that's if things aren't delayed. Now let's talk about ownership. This is a nation-building project. The nation, in case you forgot, is Canada. So the project should, in theory, lead to economic prosperity in Canada. But SLISMs is about as far from being a Canadian project as you can possibly be while sitting within Canada's borders.
The way to think about it, I think, is just the Nisga'a own the land. Western LNG owns the terminal, and Rockies LNG owns the gas. They're the gas suppliers. The terminal is 100% owned by Western LNG. If you look at their papers or whatever, they make that very clear. And of course, the terminal itself is not built in Canada. It's built in Korea with Chinese steel, and it has to be floated over. There's a lot of questionable nation-building qualities to this project.
Another major investor in SLISMs, the PRGT, and LNG Canada, another Canadian nation-building project, is Blackstone.
This is the part that I think freaks a lot of people out when they find out where the money is coming from. So there's Blackstone and Apollo are investors in it. Blackstone is headed by a guy named Steve Schwartzman, who is a top 10 Trump donor.
So in the end, the majority of the profits from SLISMs will go to American companies, including investors who heavily back Trump. You know, the same Trump who started the trade war that facilitated these nation-building projects. Meanwhile, Canada will benefit from the creation of 800 construction jobs and a permanent workforce of 250 people. But first, taxpayers will have to pay for it. Taxpayers are already on the hook for the North Coast transmission line and over $5 billion in subsidies for LNG Canada. SLISMs is supposed to cost around $10 billion, and you can expect that a large portion of that will be subsidized. Those subsidies will likely come in the form of tax breaks, exemptions, and cheaper electricity rates. But the conversation around costs doesn't stop there.
If you actually look at the LNG market, it's kind of headed for a glut right now because the US is building so many of these terminals, and there's just a renewables transitioning happening in Asia, and they're just frankly cheaper.
An in-depth report from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, published in July 2025, found that LNG is quickly moving into a period of oversupply that will lower prices. It may lower them so much that Canada's new LNG projects will not be able to break even. This risks these projects becoming stranded assets.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the case. So the BC government, especially in this new budget from the Carney government, has sloshed over a bunch of incentives, tax incentives, your tax money going towards projects like this. So taxpayers could be on the hook.
But even if Canada is able to export LNG at a profit for the foreseeable future, it's likely to increase natural gas prices domestically. If LNG exporters can get a higher price internationally, they will ship more LNG out of the country and raise prices domestically to match. In Australia, domestic natural gas prices tripled when Russia's invasion of Ukraine disrupted the global supply chain and created shortages. At the same time, the BC government is being tight-lipped about where the 2,200 megawatts from the NCTL are going to go. But based on the projected power demands of the projects that have already requested power from the transmission line, BC is likely to find itself with an energy shortage. In the short term, that might mean burning more natural gas, likely at higher prices. But proponents still say LNG is a bridge fuel, that is a climate solution, and that global demand is high, especially in countries like China that still rely heavily on coal.
You could call it a bridge fuel, but the bridge is to nowhere, right? I mean, ultimately, it's about keeping the oil and gas industry more afloat. Take LNG as a totality, and you ask what's its carbon footprint. It is, from a point of view of warming the planet, it's worse than coal.
That's because at every stage, methane is being leaked. Methane is 80 times worse than CO2 when it comes to holding in heat, meaning that emissions from the entire LNG process have a significant warming effect on the planet. Not to mention that although China is the largest importer of LNG in the world, LNG has not resulted in a reduction in coal. Instead, new coal-powered plants far outpace new gas-powered plants. Largely, it is renewable energy that is taking the market share from coal, since it's largely cheaper. Despite a sketchy cost-benefit analysis, poor environmental impacts, and its complicated effect on Indigenous relations and sovereignty, at least Slisms will get built faster, since it's been recommended to the MPO, right? Well, even that is unclear. The point of the Major Projects Office all along was to accelerate the approval process. But Slisms was already provincially and federally approved before it was recommended to the MPO. It's hard to see how the MPO will help Slisms get built faster, especially when it depends on a pipeline that Indigenous nations have already started to protest and blockade.
If you look at a lot of the projects on the Major Projects Office, they're already well underway for most of them. They're like already kind of a political win that you can put on the board. It's a little like when you write on your to-do list, write to-do list, so you can cross it off. So the thing that I think people need to know about why this is being highlighted right now is to give investors confidence that it's going to go through.
At the end of the day, LNG is not only a false climate solution, it's a risky financial bet, especially in the long term. And in the case of Slisms, billions of taxpayer dollars will fund American-owned companies that will provide a small number of Canadian jobs, linking an increasingly large section of Canada's economy to a fickle commodity that may plunge in price in the coming years. Despite being referred to the MPO, Slisms isn't a sure thing, as it awaits a final investment decision. That decision will likely be based on how heavily the government will subsidize the project, and by how much resistance is sensed in the province, of which there is a significant amount. Slisms may be a test of the effectiveness of Mark Carney's agenda to get things built, and built quickly in Canada. Will Slisms run up against the kind of roadblocks that often happen in Canada, where a project is delayed for years fighting court battles and navigating protests? Or will it find a way to secure private investment, navigate Indigenous consent, and finish on time? That's the video. Thanks for watching. If you like stuff like this, please like, comment, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. It really helps us a lot. As always, a very special thank you to everyone over at Patreon. If you want to support independent Canadian content, you can do so over at Patreon. The link will be in the description below. For this video, I also spoke to Aaron Hagee McKay, who runs The Goose, which is a YouTube channel that does deep dives into Canadian content that are extremely well researched and thought out, but also really funny. You can follow The Goose on YouTube, socials, or over at Patreon. That's it. See you next time.